It is commonly believed that man will fly directly from the Earth to the moon, but to do this, we would require a vehicle of such gigantic proportions that it would prove an economic impossibility. It would have to develop sufficient speed to penetrate the atmosphere and overcome the Earth's gravity, and having traveled all the way to the moon, it must still have enough fuel to land safely and make the return trip to Earth. Furthermore, in order to give the expedition a margin of safety, we would not use one ship alone, but a minimum of 3. Each rocket ship would be taller than New York City's Empire State Building, almost a quarter-mile high, and weigh about 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, or some 800,000 tons. Wernher von Braun, the father of the Apollo space program, writing in Conquest of the Moon. Dave, that's staggering, isn't it?
It is indeed, and interestingly enough, it was fairly recently NASA, with their latest supposed moon mission that they proposed, which wasn't even going to involve landing on the moon. It was going to just basically send a capsule out there with a few guys to sort of hover in fixed lunar orbit for observational purposes. It wasn't even going to involve, the landing, which was the most technologically challenging part of the alleged Apollo missions. And for that project, they were talking about multiple rocket launches. It was either 2 or 3 launches for each mission, like the rover, the remote-controlled rover that they were going to send up.
Now, here it comes again for the second pass. That's the big one, except not as big as the one that's coming up. Oh, here he goes. Now, the third pass. The third pass, friends, is another one where you're going to see that going into the fourth. See what I mean? I just told you that now, didn't I? Now, look at his hand. Look at the way his hand's dangling again. And if you overhear this now, hey, wait a minute, where them crosshairs go this time, eh? Now they're squares. First you get crosshairs, now you get squares. Good God Almighty. If that's not one for the history books, I don't know what is.
Now they've come full circle, and now they're saying that yeah, indeed, it would require multiple launches just to get men into lunar orbit, not even onto the surface of the moon, but just out into lunar orbit would require multiple launches. So, yeah, there was apparently that one period there in the late 60s, early 70s where none of those rules applied, and we were able to just kind of wing it, but...
That's right.
But every other...
It's as though the laws of physics were suspended for that interval of time.
Yeah, it really is, and... one of the most amazing things to me about the whole question of whether the moon launches were hoaxed or not is the fact that NASA has actually admitted at least 3 times that I'm aware of that we did not go to the moon in the 60s.
Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go, and this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
On 3 separate occasions, they have said, on one occasion they said that we do not currently have the technology to deal with the lunar dust problem.
Dust from the moon caused significant problems during some of the Apollo missions because the superfine dust got into the mechanics of spacecrafts or in the air seals of spacesuits, causing a loss of effective pressurizing.
A whole slew of advanced technology will have to be developed so that, and basically what they've talked about, and again, I have these illustrations, on in my post, and what they've said is that they're going to have to create like sort of a spacesuit that remains like docked to the outside of the rover and of the lunar module, so that basically the astronauts would sort of step in through the back of these suits and then step away from the capsule, and it would seal, and then when they re-enter the capsule, they would reverse that procedure and sort of back up and dock to the capsule, and then somehow through an airlock or whatever it is re-enter the capsule, so that the spacesuits would never re-enter the lunar modules. The reason being that they said that the dust would just pose a huge problem for the electronics and everything else, all the working and moving parts, and that they don't have the capability to deal with that dust, so they have to create this technology that would allow dust-free, walks on the moon, so to speak. But back in the 60s, they were out driving around in dune buggies, kicking up, big old rooster tails full of dust, dust flying everywhere, and, going in and out of the capsules with no airlocks or anything else. And apparently wasn't a problem then. But NASA has explicitly said that now, 40 plus years after the fact, we do not have the technology to deal with lunar dust, and if we're serious about going to the moon, we have to develop that technology. So that was one example. On another occasion, they announced that we do not currently have any suitable material for building spacesuits that would withstand the temperature extremes and just the extreme environment.
That can counteract the force of a vacuum. And you're trying to figure out what I'm talking about. I'm saying, look it up. Go look this up online if you get a chance. A bag of air cannot survive in a vacuum chamber. It can't. It blows up really tight, and eventually it bursts. So why aren't the astronaut suits going tight as a snare drum from the air that's inside the arms and legs and torso? Because it's not skin tight.
Like the Michelin Man, right?
Exactly. It would look just like the Michelin Man, but it would be so rigid you wouldn't be able to bend anything. I mean, you'd might as well be in a suit of wood.
I'd rather have a sister who worked in a cat house than a brother who worked for NASA.
As we discussed, at this point I must stay anonymous. The fluid control industry is a small village. Let us just say I am a professional in the valve industry. The point of this letter is to draw attention to certain aspects of seals, valves, and actuators that must be part of any artificial environment to maintain life and functionality. I have no special knowledge of the ISS, but there are principles of fluid and motion control that cannot be ignored. We assume that the ISS has supply systems for water, fuel, air, etc. These systems would all require valves, pumps, and seals at a bare minimum. Without systems to deliver, send, expel, vent, filter, and store these fluids and gases, life on board would be impossible. Tubing, pumps, tanks, and valves would need to be present across all of the living areas to assure, at the least, fresh air. Seals, such as O-rings, would be required throughout the ISS to hold in gases and fluids. Valves would be required to meter these gases and fluids and to maintain proper pressures. Actuators would be required to move devices such as the Canadian arm, hatch openings, etc. Anything that is not moved manually requires an actuator.
Any materials currently known, whether natural or synthetic materials, would not hold up, and they would dry out, crack, whatnot, and there's currently no materials that are suitable for building spacesuits that will survive the extreme, conditions on the moon. And they can announce stuff like this with a straight face without even acknowledging, and the amazing thing to me is that never does a reporter stand up and raise their hand and say, hey, wait a minute. How did we do it back in the 60s if you're saying that even now we don't have the technology to do it, And the third one that they have talked about is the radiation problem, which they've called a showstopper. And again, I have artist conceptions direct from NASA of these elaborate technological shields that would have to be built on the surface of the moon just to allow the astronauts to work, to land on and work on the surface of the moon for various periods of time. So we have at least three things that we do not now have, and this is all direct. This is not me saying this. This is NASA talking heads who have said that we simply do not have the radiation protection technology, we do not have the spacesuit technology, and we do not have the technology to deal with the lunar dust. All three of those are major hurdles that have to be resolved before we can go back to the moon. And those are just absolutely startling admissions that, here they are coming out publicly saying that, no, we don't have the technology to do this. 45 years ago, yes, 45 years ago we had it, but now we don't.
And of course, you're being sarcastic when you say that, because they don't insist they did have it then. I mean, they just fake it. And the brain trust that passes for the news media today lets them get away with it.
I know, it's amazing. No one questions it. I mean, no one questions the just extreme, lack of logic there in coming out and saying, well, we're going to have to develop all this totally new technology, and I'm thinking, why not just pull out those Saturn V plans? Why don't you just dust off those plans and slap a couple of those babies
together? Dust them off.
Why are we reinventing the wheel when we have a vehicle that not only made it, but it had a perfect safety record, something that we can't even match now. I mean, why in the world would you want to reinvent the wheel when you have technology that performed beautifully? I mean, perfectly. Not a single loss of life, I mean, you had the Apollo 13 nonsense, which was all for dramatic effect, but no one died. All those capsules made it back. Perfect safety record. We landed there every time except for the 13, and even they made it to the moon and back. So why do we need to come up with billions and billions of dollars of brand new technology when we have plans, in our files that for equipment that we know for a fact works with 100% reliability?
Well,
why?
I know, David. It's embarrassing that the American people are so dumb, so dull, so thick-headed that we don't have the ability to see through something as transparent as this.
It really is. I mean, I refer to it in my articles as like the adult version of believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. Because, I mean, if you really subject it to any kind of critical analysis, it's just as ridiculous. I mean, it really is. And that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. But, facts are facts. And, the more you dissect it, the deeper you dive into it, the more absurd it becomes, really.
Yeah, Winston Wu, who's a student of these kinds of absurd claims, has observed that this is the only field in which technology has regressed rather than moved forward.
That's true. I mean, yeah, if you look at the field of consumer technology, I mean, 1960, when the first when the first Apollo, capsule supposedly landed on the moon to great fanfare, a full slate of consumer electronics in your home would have been like a, 13-channel black and white TV, and a big black phone that weighed like 20 pounds, I mean, that was about all. I don't even know if like pocket calculators were being widely marketed at that time. And I mean, it's just, we've just come light years, just absolutely light years in the last 4.5 decades. And in every other, whether it's, automotive technology, whatever it is, any branch of technology that you look at has just advanced so far. The 1960s was like the dark ages, for all intents and purposes, except for in the field of space exploration, in which, we made our most amazing accomplishments that remain to this day the most technologically complex accomplishments that any nation has ever even attempted to pull off, well beyond what we're doing now. And I don't know that the average person even realizes how much more technologically difficult a moon landing is than just putting a space shuttle into low Earth orbit, which is all that we've done for the last like 40 years. That's the most we've been able to accomplish. And you know, I think a lot of people kind of have the impression that you know, it's not that big of a jump, you know, but it is. It's huge. I mean, it's just absolutely, you know, it's just light years beyond what we're doing now.
Well, I'm just fascinated and stunned at the same time.
Reluctant to give up. You know, I mean, it's the greatest technological achievement of the 20th century, right? I mean, it's constantly touted as that. And also, there's the fact that it's such a huge lie, and this, you know, maybe for a lot of people, maybe operates not even on a conscious level, but there's the fact that acknowledging that our government could be capable of pulling off such a huge lie in front of the entire world, and you know, pull the wool over the people's eyes so thoroughly, and you know, acknowledging that then opens the door to, well, you know, if they lied about that, what else have they lied about? Did they lie about the Kennedy assassination? Did they lie about 9/11? Did they lie about Waco? Did they, you know? And once you crack that door open, you know, it's life changing. You know, I mean, it's a life alter your entire perception of the world and how it operates, and you know, what our country's place in it is and whatnot. And that's very difficult.
Technology to fake it, anyone who has seen Capricorn 1 realizes how absurd it is to make that claim.
Yeah, they didn't really fake it all that well either, you know.
All things considered.
Yeah, you know, I mean, some of the video footage is kind of comical, really, and the photographs are just absolutely absurd. I mean, the quality of the photographs is
well, what's amazing about them is they're so good, you know, and the backgrounds are just as precisely defined as the foreground, which Jay Wiedner pointed out as a sign of using front screen projection, that they were all faked. And of course, Jack White, who's a legendary photo analyst who's now deceased, had done a massive studies of the moon landing, found all kinds of anomalies. You have rovers, but there are no tracks that show how they got to the position they're in. You have light that is from two different sources. You have all kinds of things like this there. And so that's the very first of that list of 9, the work on the Apollo moon photographs.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just littered with anomalies, and even above and beyond all that, they're just, the photos themselves are just physically impossible, you know? I mean, they're just not humanly possible, you know? I mean, I'm a photographer myself, and, you know, I'm a little older than I like to admit, and, you know, I have experience working with manually operated cameras where you have to set, you know, manual exposure, manual focus, and obviously you have to frame it manually, and, you know, all of those things were impossible. They didn't even have viewfinders on those cameras. You know?
They didn't even have viewfinders. They were mounted right on the spacesuit, so they couldn't even focus. And would you believe, nevertheless, Dave, every one of those photographs is perfectly framed?
And they're wearing helmets with visors and pressurized gloves, and, you know, all of this restricting, you know, restricts your field of vision, restricts your manual dexterity and whatnot. And you know, I got into it with one of the debunkers once about the photos, and I challenged him. I said, well, you show me then. You show me how it can be done. You know, you put on a motorcycle, you know, get a manually operated camera, an old, you know, 1960s vintage camera, and strap it on your chest, and put on a motorcycle helmet, and put on some nice big heavy winter gloves, and, you know, fix the camera to your chest so that you can't look through the viewfinder, and you just have to guess on the focus, and you have to guess on the exposure, and you have to guess on how the shot's framed. And you go out and you shoot a few rolls of film like that, and let me know how that works out for you. You know, because I guarantee you what you're going to get is a bunch of garbage, a bunch of completely unusable, unfocused, poorly framed, poorly exposed.
Worse than that, Dave, the cosmic rays would make havoc with a photographic plate. I mean, you couldn't get any photographs up there. And then the extreme variation, you know, between light and dark, 250 above to 250 below, it's just ridiculous. That's one of the points NASA was making now to explain why we can't get there. We can't go now because the spacesuits couldn't handle the difference in the temperatures. Well, imagine the cameras.
I know, and the film stock, you know,
Yeah.
this is like standard 1960s film stock, you know,
Right,
not
I
very
know.
high tech, not very high tech to say the least.
This
you
isn't
know?
very far from the
And,
days when
very,
we...
very temperature sensitive, very radiation sensitive.
Yes.
And yeah, they're shooting up there in the moon, 250 degrees above, you know, 250 degrees below zero, massive radiation.
It's
spikes,
incredible,
you know,
Dave, and there are people out there who still believe we went to the moon.
I know, it's astonishing. But you know, what can I say? 20 years ago, I would have laughed at this radio show. These people are crazy, you know. How could you pull off something like that and keep it secret for so long? And you know, but you know, if you really look at it, it's really irrefutable. I mean, it's impossible to believe in it. The deeper you dig into it, it just becomes intellectually impossible to accept.